Hi everyone, and welcome back to another day of sixth grade math. Today we are already on lesson 6 of this unit, where we will be looking at whether or not the mean or the median is the best measure for specific data sets. Before we jump into that, this should look familiar, but just a quick refresher because we will need to be experts at finding the median and the mean today. Remember, the median is the midpoint of the data set. It is one single number. To find it, we list our numbers in order and find the midpoint, just like you see in that example. Remember, if there is not one single number in the middle of our data set, we need to find the midpoint between our two center numbers. Median, put them in order, middle number. The mean, on the other hand, is the average of the data set. Remember, we add all the numbers together and we divide by the number of data points. So in that example there, you can see we added all of our numbers together to get 54, and we divided by 6 because there are 6 numbers in our data set. Now that we've done a quick refresher, let's jump into our Think About It question. Jonah and his sister got their progress report with 5 test scores. For each data set, is the mean or the median more representative of the test scores? Explain. When I say go, you will pause the video and head into Desmos. You are on screens 2 and 3, determining if you would use the mean or the median to best represent Jonah, and the mean or the median to best represent Lila's test scores. Please make sure you explain your reasoning. Your teacher's going to look through your responses, and we're going to start by just discussing Jonah's data set, and then we'll jump into Layla's after we come back together. But again, you are answering screens 2 and 3 in Desmos. Go ahead. I'm sure you guys just had a really strong discussion about Jonah's data set. Let's actually look at the data a little bit closer to just stamp what we learned from Jonah's data set. We know that Jonah's mean test score is 78, and we know that his median test score is 89. So the question we were trying to determine is the mean or the median more representative of his test scores? So is 78 or 89 more representative of his test scores? We see that the median is more representative. And the reason why is because the outlier of 30 has a larger impact on the mean, which makes the mean less representative of the data set. Yes, he did get a 30, but that was just one test. All of his other data points are much closer to 89. So factoring that outlier into the mean actually changes the mean a lot more and makes it less representative of the test scores. So to stamp our first fence post, the median is more appropriate when there are outliers. Because Jonah's data set had an outlier, the median is more appropriate. Now let's look at Lila's data set. You already answered this in the Think About It. We know that Lila's mean, when we calculate it, is 87.4. We know that her median is 87. So which is more representative, the mean or the median? Your teacher's going to pause the video and call in a few scholars to share before we come back together. So 87.4 and 87 are very close values. So both the mean and the median are actually pretty representative of this data set. However, the mean is more representative. And the reason why is because when we calculate the mean, we include every single value in our calculation, whereas the median only includes one number from our data set. So while both the median and the mean are good to represent this data set, the mean is better. And the reason why the mean is still a strong representation, unlike in Jonah's data set, is because Lila's data set does not have any outliers. Let's stamp that key point. When there are no outliers, the mean is more appropriate to use because it takes into account all the data points. Let's put our fence post together to stamp our key point. The mean is more appropriate when there are not outliers, and the median is more appropriate when there are outliers. We saw this play out in this data set. Jonah's data set had an outlier of 30. Therefore, we would use the median as the most representative number for his data set, whereas Lila's data set had no outliers, so we would use the mean. The mean is more appropriate when there are not outliers, and the median is more appropriate when there are outliers. Let's look at an example together. It says the Department of Housing in New York City reports on the average monthly rent people pay. The 10 amounts below are a sample of the cost of rent for 10 one-bedroom apartments in Harlem. Does the mean or median of the data best represent the average cost of rent in Harlem? Support your answer with mathematical evidence. We're actually going to hold off on supporting our answer because we're going to use our key point in order to determine if the mean or the median best represents the average cost. Using our key point and this data set, we're going to pause the video and head into Desmos to determine if the mean or the median best represents this data set. Be sure to explain your thinking very clearly so that your teacher can see your thoughts before we come back together to debrief. Go. Before we reveal which one, the mean or the median, is most representative of this data set, let's actually just look at the numbers here. If you calculate the mean, I'm going to save us time on this because we know how to calculate the mean and we're more interested right now in determining which is the better measure. If you calculated the mean, you would have gotten 2,105. If you calculate the median, you would get 2,100. Those are very close. So which is more representative, the mean or the median? Well, as I look at this data set, I see there are no outliers in this data set. All of the numbers are within a similar range. There's not one number or two numbers that stand out as much higher or much lower. So both the median and the mean would be representative. And I see that because they're very close. But since the mean takes into account all of the data points when calculating, it will be the best representation. So if you said that the mean was the best representation, you were spot on. And if you said that's because there are no outliers and the mean takes into account all values, you remembered our key point absolutely perfectly. Nice job. Let's look at one more example together. This says customers at the Brooklyn Steakhouse, Peter Luger, were asked to rank their customer service satisfaction on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being the worst and 10 the best. The results of a random group of customers on a Tuesday night are shown below. And there we can see our data set. If the restaurant wants to report out the results of their survey, which measure of center should they use? Support your answer with mathematical evidence. Again, we're going to hold off on the mathematical evidence. So for now, we're going to pause the video, head into Desmos, and choose mean or median and explain why. Remember to use that key vocab from earlier in the lesson to make sure you are crystal clear on why you chose the answer that you chose. Then we'll come back together to debrief. Go. Before we look at the numbers, I and your teacher wants to see where we're at right now. So quick question that we're going to vote in Zoom on. Are there any outliers in this data set? Your teacher's going to pause the video, yes or no in Zoom. Are there any outliers in this data set? Ready? Vote. Hopefully you said yes, there is an outlier in this data set. The data point of 1 is an outlier in this data set. As you can see, all of the data points are 8, 9, and 10 except for 1, which means that somebody felt that their customer service was really poor. But pretty much everybody else on that Tuesday felt that they had pretty good customer service. So based on the fact that there is an outlier in this data set, we know that the median will be more representative. And if we look at the numbers, our mean is 8.62. I rounded that to the nearest hundredth. And the median is 9. Those numbers are very close. So we're not saying that the mean is not representative of this data set. All we're saying is that the median is a better representation because that outlier of 1 is going to have a larger impact on the mean, and it's actually going to skew it down. So as we can see there, the mean is lower than the median. So the better representation here is the median because we have an outlier. Go ahead and give yourselves a clapping hands in Zoom if you were able to determine the correct answer for both of our INMs today. One more stamp of our key point. The mean is more appropriate when there are not outliers. The median is more appropriate when there are outliers. So we got to have a sharp eye today as we're looking at data sets to determine whether or not there are outliers in our data sets. As you are working today, remember what we just did was take the following steps. 1, identify if there are any outliers in the data set. 2, determine if the mean or the median is more appropriate. Remember, use whether or not there is presence of outliers to determine that. And last, which we didn't do a ton of now because I gave you the answers, but we'll go back to flexing our muscles on how to calculate mean and median to check. So if you think the median is more accurate, you should be finding both the median and the mean to prove that your number is the most representative number of the data set. Good luck on your classwork today, and I will see you all tomorrow.